Welcome to chapter 14 of the book of Leviticus, continuing with the laws regarding lepros. Could be either a person with a skin condition called leprosy or what was called lepros in I think it's 13th chapter. It was either a material or in a house. Now, these chapters were describing what it was that was unclean. And here we find out what the Lord has the people or a person that has been cleaned of leprosy, what he's to do. Now, the only person that mentions, I believe, in the Old Testament that was healed of leprosy was Naaman the Syrian, a general who was up in Syria, and he had a Hebrew slave, and she told him that there was a prophet in Israel that could heal him, and he ended up going down and going to Elisha, the prophet, who told him to go dip in I think the Jordan River or something, and he was offended because he thought he could go to bigger rivers in Syria, but then somebody spoke to him and said, well, if he told you to basically something like if he told you to climb Mount Everest, you would have done it, but something simple, you don't want to do it. So he went ahead and did it, and he was cleaned of his leprosy, and that's, again, 2 Kings 5, 1-27. And Jesus uses this in Luke 4:27 when he's talking to the Jews, how the only person that was healed of the leprosy was a Syrian, wasn't a Jew, and they became angry at him and wanted to get rid of him. So the law for the leprosy was really not, it was something that was set out that it was hardly ever used. Here we have in 8:1 where it's Jesus cleanses the leper, and in his coming down from the mountain, a great multitude followed him. And behold, a leper, having come, did obeisance to him, saying, O Lord, if you should want, you are able to cleanse me. And stretching out the hand, Jesus touched him, saying, I want, be cleansed. And immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. And Jesus says to him, see that you tell no one. In the imperative, don't tell anybody, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift offering, the thoron, which we've talked about, the korban offering, and general offering for that, Moses assigned for a testimony to them. Now, other places that leprosy is mentioned in the New Testament were when John the Baptist's disciples came to Jesus and they asked if he was the one that was coming, and he said to tell John in Matthew 11:5 that lepers are cleansed. And then it mentions Jesus going to Simon the leper's house, who apparently was cured, where the woman with the alabaster jar anointed Jesus, and that's Matthew 26:6. And then in the last chapter we read Luke 17:1 about the 10 lepers who were cleansed, and the one came back who was a Samaritan. So those all things were in the New Testament, but before that, Naaman, of course, didn't have to go to the priests for this testimony to them, but yet Jesus did, and I'm not sure how they accepted this. They probably did it as the man that was healed from being blind, and I think he's blind or crippled, but from his youth, and they called his parents because they didn't believe that he was actually that person, but he was, and Jesus did all these signs, but yet they still didn't accept who he was. Now, what did this leper have to do? So we'll go through this, read it. It's quite long, but we'll do like we did in the 13th chapter. Just read it all, because basically, there's no temple. Nobody's going to be doing any of this right now, or in the near future, because there is no temple, there's no sacrifices, and no priesthood. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, This is the law of the leper, nomos, nomi, astronomy, Deuteronomy, law. In whatever day he should have been cleansed, and shall be brought to the priest. Iraea is, we have the hieroglyphics, the priestly writing. So whenever you see this iota, epsilon, re, then you know it has something to do with the priest. And the priest shall come forth exo, outside the camp. And the priest shall look, and behold, if the infection has been healed of the leprosy from the leopard, then the priest shall assign, and they shall take for the one being cleansed 2 clean, living small birds. Now, you can add this ornithia. We have ornithology, the study of birds. And you can add that to your English derivatives book. And wood of kedron, cedar comes from that, cedar, Kedr, and twine, scarlet, and hyssop. And the priest shall assign, and they shall slay the one small bird into an earthenware receptacle over living water, as running water. And the small living bird, he shall take it in the wood of cedar, and the spun scarlet, and the hyssop, and shall dip them. Now we have vopsy, we have baptize, or immerse, as I always have it. He shall immerse them, and the living small bird into the blood of the small bird being slain over the living water. And he shall sprinkle it about upon the one being cleansed of the leprosy 7 times. So 7 times now he's sprinkling it. And I mentioned before the difference in the baptizing or immersing. We see baptize, and I had a minister of a mainline denomination say he didn't like, the only thing he didn't like about the Apostolic Bible was using the word immerse. I said, what should it be? And he said, sprinkle or poured. Well, I said, if it was that, then he would have used these other words, rantizo and rantizo and reo for flowing it out, pouring it. And he shall send out the small living bird into the plain, so it flies off. And the one being cleansed shall wash his garments, and he shall shave all his hair, and shall bathe in water, and shall be clean. And after these things he shall enter into the camp. And before he couldn't go into the camp, and he had to wear all these old raggedy clothes, cover his mouth. And he shall spend time outside of his house 7 days. And it will be on the 7th day he shall shave all of his hair, the hair of his head, and the beard, and the brows, even all his hair he shall shave. Excuse me. And he shall wash his garments, and shall bathe his body in water, and he shall be clean. And on the 8th day he shall take 2 lambs, unless he's poor, unblemished of a year old, and 1 sheep, unblemished of a year old, and 3/10 of fine flour for a sacrifice offering, being covered in olive oil, and 1 small cup of olive oil. And the priest that cleanses shall stand the man for the cleansing, and these offerings before the Lord, at the door of the tent of the testimony. And the priest shall take the 1 lamb and bring it for the trespass offering, and the small cup of olive oil, and he shall separate them as a separation offering before the Lord. And he shall slay the lamb in the topography, is a study of maps, places, in the place where they slay the whole burnt offerings, and the ones for a sin offering. This is, again, I mentioned that because in the New Testament just calls Jesus became sin for us. He became sin for us, amortias, sin offering, in the holy place. For it is the one for a sin offering, as the one of the trespass offering is for the priest. It is a holy of holies. And the priest shall take from the blood of the trespass offering, and the priest shall place it upon the lobe. You can add that to your English derivatives book. Lobe and transliteration into English, of the ear of the one being cleansed, the right. Now this is sort of the same thing as when the sons of Aaron and Aaron were anointed in the same way on the right, upon the thumb of his hand. the right, and upon the big toe of his foot, the right. And the priest taking from the small cup of the olive oil, he shall pour upon the left hand of the priest. And the priest shall dip his right finger from the olive oil being in his left hand, and he shall sprinkle from the olive oil with his finger 7 times before the Lord. This is during the sacrifices. And the left behind olive oil being in his hand, the priest shall place upon the lobe of the right ear of the one being cleansed, and upon the thumb of his right hand, the right, and upon the big toe of his foot, the right, upon the place of the blood of the trespass offering. And the leftover olive oil that is upon the hand of the priest shall place it upon the head of the one being cleansed, and the priest shall atone for him before the Lord. And the priest shall offer the thing for the sin offering, and the priest shall atone for the one being cleansed of his sin. And after this the priest shall slay the whole burnt offering. And the priest shall offer the whole burnt offering and the sacrifice offering upon the altar before the Lord, and the priest shall atone for him, and he shall be cleansed. And if he should be in need, poor, and his hand should not find what is needed, he shall take 1 lamb for what he trespassed, for a cutaway portion, so as to atone for him, and 1/10 of fine flour being mixed in olive oil for a sacrifice offering, and 1 small cup of olive oil. Now, I'm not sure if it doesn't say "or" because it says "and," but it almost seems like it would be if he had wealth, he would have that, and with the circumcision with Mary, she was poor, and so they just had the 2 turtle doves. So here it doesn't have "or," but so I'm not exactly sure if he has to still go out and get a lamb or not. And 2 turtle doves, I'm sure he would if he wanted to be clean of leprosy. And 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, as much as his hand found. That is, if he didn't have a lot of money. And the one shall be for a sin offering, and the one for a whole burnt offering. So it seems like it's separating of them because it says the one and the one. So it's the 2 turtle doves are the 2 young pigeons. And he shall bring them on the 8th day for his cleansing to the priest, and to the door of the tent of the testimony before the Lord with these 2 birds. And the priest taking, now see, he has the lamb of the trespass offering, and the small cup of the olive oil, and he shall place them for an increase offering before the Lord. And he shall slay the lamb of the trespass offering, unless they got the lamb somewhere else. And the priest shall take from the blood of the trespass offering, and shall place it upon the lobe of the ear of the one being cleansed, the right, and upon the thumb of his hand, the right, and upon the big toe of his foot, the right. And of the olive oil the priest shall pour upon his own hand, the left, and the priest shall sprinkle rantizo, that's rani, he shall sprinkle. Now we had, before we had pour and baptize or immerse. And the priest shall sprinkle with his dactylo finger, the right, from the olive oil in his hand, the left, 7 times before the Lord. And the priest shall put of the olive oil being in his hand upon the lobe of the ear of the one being cleansed, the right, and upon the thumb of his hand, the right, and upon the big toe of his foot of the right, upon the place of the blood of the one of the trespass offering. And the leftover olive oil being in the hand of the priest, he shall place upon the head of the one being cleansed, and the priest shall atone for him before the Lord. And he shall offer 1 from the turtle doves, or from the young ones of the pigeons, insofar as his hand found, the one for a sin offering, and the one for a whole burnt offering, with a sacrifice offering. And the priest shall atone for the one being cleansed before the Lord. This is the law, in whom is found the infection of the leprosy, and not finding means in his hands enough for his cleansing. So all these are here until 32 all have to do with the skin conditions Now we have the third, skin, the material like cloth and leather. Now the houses. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Whenever you should enter into the land of the Canaanites, which I give to you for a possession, and I put an infection of lepros in the houses of the land procured by you, then one from the house shall come and shall announce to the priest, saying, Something as an infection has appeared to me in the house. Now, these houses were made with, a lot of them were made with a stone, and then they plastered them with a plaster and whitewashed them with something white, and the infection could get into the plaster, apparently, exactly what it was, some type of a mold. I live in Newport, Oregon, on the Oregon coast, a lot of moisture here. If you don't keep your house dry, we get what's called black mold, and regular mold is greenish, but black mold is black. As it says, it gives off little spores, and people can become very sick with this black mold. So you have to keep your house dry with a dehumidifier, and I have two, one upstairs and one downstairs where I have the Bibles, and then I have heaters upstairs and downstairs to keep this place dry. I have not I found places outside when I was remodeling, reciting, where water got in from a leaky window, went down within this old siding and hit a beam, and it all rotted, and it had all kinds of little bugs, and so I had to clean it all out and rebuild it, recover it, put a new window in, and fix it all up. So these people had something similar. They had some type of a problem with this plaster, and if they saw it, they called the priest. Then one from the house shall come and shall announce to the priest, saying, Something as an infection has appeared to me in the house, and the priest will assign to pack up the house before the priest enters to look at the infection. So everything goes out. That in no way, as much as might be in the house, should become unclean. So it goes outside, and inside it hasn't been declared unclean yet, so everything it was in goes out. And after these things the priest shall enter to study the house. And he shall look at the infection, and behold, if the infection is in the walls of the house, with a cavity being greenish, and that would be like to me that mold, or being reddish, and their appearance deeper in the walls, goes into the plaster, is probably falling out because they can see an indentation. And the priest coming forth from out of the house, at the door of the house, that the priest shall separate the house 7 days, so nobody can go in the house. And the priest shall come back on the 7th day, and he shall look at the house. And behold, if the infection was diffused, that spread in the house, then the priest shall assign, and they shall take out the stones in which is the infection in the plaster, and shall cast them outside the city into an unclean place. So out goes all this bad stuff, just like that wood that I had, took it to the dump. And they shall scrape the house from inside round about, and that is wherever that moldy stuff was, and shall pour out the plaster dust of the scraping outside the city into an unclean place, same place. And they shall take stones being scraped of others, and they shall substitute for the stones. New stones go in, and they shall take other plaster dust, and they shall plaster the house and make it all look new. But if the infection should come again, and should rise up in the house after the taking away of the stones, and after the scraping the house, and after the new plastering, then the priest shall enter and shall look, and if the infection in the house be dispersed, it is a permanent lepra in the house. See, now, leprosy is an English word, and we use that word for a skin infection. Now, as far as using the word leprosy in English, normally, probably the King James, I don't know what they used, but it probably wasn't leprosy, but it is lepra, it's the same Greek word, so that's why I still use leprosy, but it's a different thing, of course, than which was in the skin. So anyway, that house now is unclean. They should demolish the house and its wood and its stones, lithography, writing on stones, and all the plaster dust of the house they shall bring forth outside the city unto an unclean place. And the one entering into the house, all the days which it is being separated, will be unclean until evening. All the people that were working, building it, now after it's been declared unclean permanently, then they're unclean. And the one going to bed in the house shall wash his garments, and he will be unclean until evening. And the one eating in the house shall wash his garments. And if coming, the priest should enter and look, and behold, the infection is not dispersed in the house after the replastering the house, that the priest shall declare the house cleansed, for the infection is healed. And he shall take to purify the house another 2 small living birds, woods of cedar and twine, scarlet and hyssop, the same as the other one. And he shall slay the one small bird into an earthenware utensil over living water, pouring water probably. And he shall take the wood of cedar and the twine scarlet and hyssop and the living small bird, and shall dip them into the blood of the small bird having been slain over the living water, and shall sprinkle about them upon the house 7 times. And he shall purify the house with the blood of the small bird, and with the living water, and with the living bird, and with the wood of cedar, and with the hyssop, with the twine scarlet. And he shall send out the living small bird outside the city into the plain. So I don't know if they took it out in a cage and let it go, or just let it go, and probably did. And shall atone for the house, and it will be clean. This is the law for every infection of lepros and outbreak, even if it wasn't, if it was an outbreak of some sort. And the lepros of a garment and house, and discoloration and spot and shining, to describe the day unclean and the day it shall be cleansed. This is the law of the lepros, of the leprosy. The next chapter, we get into bodily flows of humans and find out what that is all about. And hope you'll join us in chapter 15 in the next video seminar. Until then, God bless.